What do Easter bunnies and Easter eggs have to do with Jesus Christ? How about this? Nothing. Well, hello, my friends. I'm Adrian Davis, and welcome to the Armor of God on the web. As we approach the traditional sacred Christian holiday of Easter, I want to ask you the question, should Christians observe Easter? You know, when I was a child, my aunts and uncles would always visit at Easter time and Christmas, these pagan holidays. And for Easter, they would always bring chocolate Easter bunnies and chocolate Easter eggs. And we were very excited as children and never asked the question, what do these have to do with Jesus Christ? Well, a lot of people think that Easter is in the Bible, and they'll turn to Acts chapter 12 and verse 4. Let's go there, where they'll see Easter is in fact in the Bible. And here in Acts chapter 12, verse 4, Herod had just apprehended Peter, one of the apostles, or arrested him, and put him in prison. And it says here, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people, to basically execute him after Easter. But if you actually look at the Greek word for this English word Easter, we see this as a translation issue. The Greek word is Pascha, which means Passover. And if you look at the verse before, it shows that these were the days of unleavened bread, and Passover and unleavened bread, that whole period was referred to by the Jews as the Passover season. So Acts 12, chapter 4, is not talking about Easter at all. It's talking about the Passover, and therefore there's no place for Easter anywhere in the Bible. So where does Easter come from? If you look in the encyclopedia in Wikipedia, under the entry Eostre, E-O-S-T-R-E, or Ostara, you'll see this, that Eostre is a Germanic goddess. So Eostre is a Germanic goddess, and during Eastermona, which is the month of Easter, pagan Anglo-Saxons held feasts in Easter's honor. So this was actually a pagan tradition. It's an ancient tradition where pagans would come together and worship Ishtar, Easter, and it was a pagan ritual. And this is where we see bunnies and eggs, because this Germanic goddess, and this goddess that was worshipped all around the world actually, was the goddess of fertility. And rabbits are known for their fertility, and eggs are part of the fertility festivals, and that's what this was. And in fact, the people of God anciently were always getting involved in these pagan worship practices, and so it's no different today. If we go back anciently to the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 17, we'll see this, that the children of Israel, the Jews here, were gathering wood and the fathers were kindling fire so that the women could knead the dough and make cakes to the Queen of Heaven. That is Ishtar. That is Eostre. This is an ancient tradition. And so those hot cross buns and the Easter buns that we would eat at Easter time, this is an ancient tradition. And it's all to do with the worship of this Queen of Heaven. If you look in Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 16, we see something else, because here in this modern day and age, we have something called sunrise Easter services. And maybe you've participated in these, where the service is timed in such a way that during the service, toward the end of the service, the sun is rising. And the Christians will assemble at that time to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, is that what they're really celebrating? Look at this in Ezekiel 8, chapter 16. It says, God brought Ezekiel into the inner court of the Lord's house. And behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men. What were they doing? You know, they're inside the temple. You'd expect them to be worshiping God. Well, let's see what they were doing. Their backs were toward the temple of the Lord. They turned their back toward the temple of the Lord. Well, where were they facing? And their faces toward the east. Why were their faces toward the east? Here's what it says. And they worshiped the sun toward the east. So this was a sunrise services. That's why you worship the sun toward the east, because the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. And so these sunrise services were ancient pagan practices around worshiping the sun. And so here we see that God was really furious with his people for getting caught up in these ancient pagan practices. So how did these practices then come into Christianity? Why do Christians today observe Easter, which is a ancient pagan ritual? Well, it has to do with something called syncretism, and that's a big word, but it basically means combining, synthesizing different practices. And at the time in Rome, the Roman Emperor Constantine, he had pagans, he had Jews, he had Christians, he had people of multiple religions and faiths and practices, and he wanted to unite them all under a single religion. And so he made Christianity the state religion. And the pagans were worshiping the sun god, the Christians were worshiping the Son of God, and so he just combined all of this. And so with that sunrise services, for those who were worshiping the sun, that was great, the sun god. For others, the Son of God, and he just made it all the same. And if you look under the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Council of Nicaea, this was in 325, and this is where Easter was established as a empire-wide holiday. And here in the Council of Nicaea, in the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says something very interesting. In 325 AD, this was the first ecumenical council. Ecumenical just means general council. All of the bishops and everybody in the empire were called together for this Christian church, meeting in Nicaea. And it says it was called by the Emperor Constantine, who was an unbaptized neophyte. In other words, he had no clue what Christianity was about. He wasn't even a Christian. But he presided, it says he presided over the session, and he participated in it. Now, at the end of that council, he wrote this letter, and I just want to read from this letter. I think it's very informative. I want to read from this letter. This is the letter that he sent to all the churches of the Roman Empire at the end of this council. Constantine Augustus, to the churches. At the council, they were considering the matter of God's divinity, but then they also considered the matter of Easter. At the council, we also considered the issue of our holiest day, Easter. And it was determined by common consent that everyone, everywhere, should celebrate it on one and the same day. For what can be more appropriate or what more solemn than that this feast from which we have received the hope of immortality should be kept by all without variation. So this is actually a threat that he's sending to his whole empire, that there is no variation, everybody should keep Easter on the same day, using the same order. And in the first place, it seemed very unworthy for us to keep this most sacred feast following the custom of the Jews, which was the Passover. People who have soiled their hands in a most terrible outrage. So he goes on and he basically says, we want nothing to do with the Jewish customs, really the biblical customs, and instead he established Easter, this pagan practice, as the church-wide religion. Now this set off a controversy in the empire, where if you were to read the Quartodeciman controversy, and again, quartodeciman sounds like a big word, it just means 14, quarto being 4 and deciman being 10. These were the 14th day of the first month, which is the Passover. There were Christians who were holding on to the Passover and observing it on the 14th, and they wouldn't observe the Easter celebration. And so there's this controversy, and if you look up the Quartodeciman controversy, it says that in Asia Minor, the churches of Jerusalem and Asia Minor, which is Turkey today, they celebrated Passover on the 14th day of the first month, while churches in the rest of Rome were happy to celebrate Easter. So what's going on here? Why are churches in the western part of the Roman Empire happy to celebrate Easter, whereas those in Jerusalem and Asia Minor are holding on to the Passover? To answer that question, we need to go to the book of Acts. And if you come with me to Acts chapter 19, and we go to verse 10, you'll see that the Apostle Paul was teaching very fervently all the churches in Asia. And it says that this continued by the space of 2 years, so that all of them which dwell in Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, both Jews and Greeks. So the Greeks also, the Gentiles also, heard the word of the Lord directly by the preaching of Paul. And they would have learned from Paul about the Passover, about the holy days, and they were holding on to this. Those churches in the western part of the Roman Empire, they were just told by Constantine, Christianity is now your new religion. And so they just accepted it. And so when he said to them, and now you'll keep Easter, they just accepted it. But those churches that actually learned the gospel from the Apostle Paul and the holy days from the Apostle Paul, they were unwilling to give up the Passover in place of Easter. And that's what caused this controversy, the Quartodeciman controversy within the churches or within the Roman Empire and the various church congregations. I'm going to conclude with this passage in 1 Corinthians 5, just to show you that this church in Corinth, which was primarily Gentile, that they were keeping the Passover and the days of unleavened bread. In 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, Paul says, "Purge out or clean out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." So the Passover actually pictures the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and it's very, very meaningful. "Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So not only were they keeping the Passover, they were also keeping the days of unleavened bread. And this is not the subject of this program today, but we could show you that they were keeping all of the holy days outlined in Leviticus 23, which have tremendous meaning. And they were not keeping, and they were resisting and unwilling to keep these pagan practices. So should Christians observe Easter? I hope, my friends, that you've seen today, the answer is clearly no. That Easter is not a Christian holiday. It's an ancient pagan festival that crept into Christianity with the introduction of, with Constantine introducing Christianity to the Roman Empire, making it the state religion, and then making Easter the official holiday, celebrating the resurrection rather than the death of Christ. I'd like you to write to us and ask for a reprint article called "Should Christians Observe Easter?" Should Christians observe Easter? Just email us at info@cgi.org, info@cgi.org, or you can go to our website, www.cgi.org, www.cgi.org, and request, "Should Christians observe Easter?" So as we approach Easter, I just want to reach out to you and ask you to ask for this publication, "Should Christians Observe Easter?" Thank you, my friends, for joining us on the Armor of God. I'm Adrian Davis, and look forward to seeing you again next time.